This is Chicken Beak here to give you a comprehensive guide to the new Conglomerate Vanguard main battle tank. The first thing you need to know about the Vanguard is that it is not available everywhere. If you're at a vehicle terminal like the one in front of me and it shows a tank graphic, then you can pull main battle tanks from that terminal. Usually these will be found at warp gates, at tech plants, and in any large base, particularly those connected directly to a tech plant. If it is not available, you'll see a graphic of a Sunderer instead of the tank. So without further ado, let's take a look at what you can get on this amazing vehicle. We're going to start with ones that are not the guns first, because the guns are actually not the most important things on this tank. So let's start with the options. The Vanguard shield is the one thing you absolutely should take every time on this tank, because it is essentially a push the button and you become invulnerable power. It absorbs a ridiculous amount of damage before going down, and it allows you to survive in situations where otherwise you would be a smoking hulk on the battlefield. The Vanguard is the only tank in the game that gets this. It's like having a heavy assault overshield on your tank. Always, always take this option. The next thing to look at is which item you're going to pick for defense. There are a lot of different options on this list, and a lot of people will argue for different ones, but I'm going to tell you that the reinforced armor is really not worth it. And the reason I say that is because it is an entirely situational item. If you get the reinforced front armor and you're attacked from the side, the certs that you put into that and the mounting on the tank are totally worthless to you. So I think that it's much better for you to pick something that will essentially always be useful to you. The ones that I usually hear people talk about are the nanite auto repair system and vehicle stealth. Vehicle stealth has its advantages, but once you start firing the gigantic cannon on this thing, you're going to show up on the mini-map anyway, and the fact of the matter is you're not exactly a Flash when you're driving this thing. You're not going to be going over the tops of mountains and sneaking around as readily as you would with a smaller, faster vehicle. Nanite Auto Repair is a wonderful option for this because it works well with the Vanguard shield. When you're on the main line of battle and you're shooting and you start taking a lot of damage, you can click the shield and fire once or twice more and then back off of the front lines in order to repair. When you start backing up, you're going to eventually stop taking damage long enough for the nanite auto repair system to kick in, and it will help by starting to repair the tank even before you have a chance to get out and start doing it yourself. And as a side note, need I even mention that when you're driving an expensive vehicle, you should always be an engineer so that you can have that miraculous repair tool to bring your vehicle back up to full health as quickly as possible? Okay, so let's just assume that you're an engineer for using this vehicle. Getting back to the options, the nanite auto repair is the best one to go with in my opinion. Some people will argue for mine guard because driving over tank mines and dying is always frustrating, but the fact of the matter is that if that happens to you, the odds are there's going to be more than one mine in the area, and you may drive over more than one of them and die anyway, even with mine guard. Proximity radar I would not even bother with, and just stick with the nanite auto repair system in all cases. Next we have the performance item. Now a lot of people swear by the rival high-speed chassis because it gives you something that this tank doesn't have a lot of on its own, which is top speed. But I'm going to tell you that I prefer the rival combat chassis, and the reason for that is it increases your rotation speed, reverse, and braking power. Why is that important? Because again, normally you will be moving to the front lines, firing like a madman until you need to back away, and then retreating just long enough to repair your vehicle and get back into the fight. Being able to retreat effectively because you have the rival combat chassis is going to make a huge amount of difference in whether or not you can fall back to a repair position and then get back into combat after fixing the tank itself. Now let's get on to the fun part, the big cannons. When you're using a main battle tank, the first thing you have to decide before you choose your guns is what role you want to fill on the battlefield. There are basically three ways you can trick out a tank at this level, one of which is to defeat other vehicles. The second is to kill a lot of infantry with splash damage, and the third is to go with a middle-of-the-road approach. I'm going to immediately say you should skip the middle-of-the-road approach because this tank is so good at specialist tasks that if you don't outfit for that, you're wasting some of its potential. Now, when you're going to be using this tank to kill other vehicles, there's no question you should use the Titan 150 AP or armor-piercing cannon. It does an absolutely ludicrous amount of alpha strike damage, has basically no splash. As you can see here, the splash only goes to 1 meter, and it's not exceptionally high, but it absolutely does a crushing amount of single-shot damage. If you're going to use that, you should pair it with a secondary weapon that is also useful for killing tanks. And that would mean you're either going to want to use the halberd, which is a really high alpha damage weapon with almost no projectile drop, or you're going to want to use the enforcer, which has higher damage over time than the Vanguard, although it does have a higher projectile drop. The enforcer is generally better when you're in close and need to just unload a consistent high amount of damage into enemy vehicles. The halberd is much better for sniping. If you want to go with the Mjolnir, that is also an outstanding choice. It can do a lot of damage in one volley, and it fires 4 times every time you click, so it's just a fabulous item for use up close. It does not work very well at long distances because you have a lot of bullet drop, and the arcing of the shots that you need in order to land hits becomes somewhat of a challenge. But if you're going to be very aggressive, it has extremely good damage output. If you're going to fill an anti-personnel role, the cannon to get is the Titan HE, or High Explosive. As you can see, it does twice the splash damage of the AP round, and it has 5 times the splash radius. It is fantastic for firing into windows or doors into tightly packed groups of infantry that are holding buildings that your team needs to capture. It's just an outstanding tool for that. It is not nearly so good at killing vehicles. You can see it only does 1,300 damage instead of almost 2,100, so it does only about 2/3 the damage of the AP cannon. The middle-of-the-road gun is the Heat. It does a bit more alpha damage to vehicles, and it has middle-of-the-road splash. The splash radius is as good as the HE, but the damage is only 3/4 as much. So it's not going to be as effective in an anti-personnel role, but it does do a decent job as a middle-of-the-road item if you want to go with that option. Still best used against vehicles, but it certainly has some anti-troop capability. Now, if you're going to go anti-personnel, you really want to consider a different weapon than the halberd or the enforcer. In that case, you're definitely going to want to consider the canister. It's essentially a really high-end shotgun, which actually will take out infantry at surprisingly long ranges, and when I get to the demo portion of the video, I'll let you see it in action. It really is a spectacular tool for erasing foot soldiers. Just a really good option for that. You can also do a decent job if you want to take people out one at a time with the Cobalt machine gun, which is sort of an underrated gun for what it does, because you can put a decent zoom on it and actually take out infantry at significant range. I would avoid using the Walker because if you're shooting at aircraft, you're sort of missing the point of a main battle tank, and I would skip the Basilisk because it's too average to be of real significant specialist use. The Ranger, of course, is another anti-air gun, so that's another one you can basically skip. As far as weapon attachments go, there are 3 classes of attachment you can get, as with most weapons. You can get an optic, a utility, and an ammo slot. So if we take a look, the optic gives you anywhere up to a 2x zoom, you can get night vision, and you can get thermal. Contrary to what I did, and I'm going to let you learn from my mistake, the optic is not the first thing you should buy. The most important thing you can get on this vehicle is going to be the reload speed. And the reason for that is when you're firing a gun that has a 1-round magazine, in other words, it has to reload after every shot, a reload speed increase translates into a direct firing rate improvement. Okay? So when you get this maxed out at reload speed 5, that's a ½ second drop in the reload time, and the reload time, if you take a look up here, is 4 seconds. So that drops it to 3.5, which is a 1/8 or 12.5% improvement in your firing speed, and that equates to a 12.5% increase to your damage per minute straight off the top. Absolutely worth it for you to do that. You should also increase your ammo capacity because these rounds go very quickly when you're really in a pitched battle, and you don't want to be stuck with no rounds left in your main gun, and you don't want to have to keep retreating back to an ammo sundae or an ammo tower. Your best bet is to get the optic last. You really don't need it for firing at long range for the most part because the cannons on this tank have a very fine crosshair, meaning the lines on the screen are very narrow. It makes it very easy to pinpoint where you're going to be aiming the shot. If you really want to get an optic improvement, you would be much better off with thermal or night vision. I'm going to recommend thermal because it's fantastic for picking out troops on the ground by making them stand out, particularly against any kind of background that their camo scheme works well against. The attachment options for the weapons you're going to use as a secondary vary based on what type of weapon it is. The halberd is a single shot weapon. You can see where it says ammo 1/30. It's definitely worth it to get the reload speed on that because it will absolutely improve your damage output. When you're using something with a multiple shot per magazine configuration like this one, which has 10 shots per magazine, it becomes less critical because you're going to be unloading a lot of shots, and then, only then, will you have any downtime. So make your decision based on whether or not the item has a single round per magazine. And now for the fun part. Let's get this sucker on the road and see what it can do. Now, as for tips and tricks with the tank, when you're not actively engaged in firing, you want to use the third-person view, and there are two important reasons for that. The first one is it gives you a much wider field of view than the first-person view you get when you're actually looking at the crosshairs. And the second one is that when you're in first-person view, your camera angle and speed of turning are locked to the turret turn rate. Whereas when you're in the third-person view, the camera can turn faster than the turret, and that allows you to quickly look around without having to wait for the turret to swing all the way around to match where you want to look. So let's hit T and go to third-person mode. Now, as you can see, I can see a lot more, and you can see that the camera will move while the turret is still swinging to catch up. And this is the mode in which you would normally want to drive around while looking for a fight. Let's go find something to shoot, shall we? Now, before I do too much where we start counting damage, I'm going to back up a hair so I can show you what I meant about this tank being very good for long-range shots even without an optic improvement. Let's go to first-person view.
ID'd an enemy prowler.
There's a prowler over there. You can see how tiny the little cross is that I'm aiming at. One click and we've hit it. It's excellent for sniping. The bullet drop is very modest on the AP cannon. You can also see that this tank is a very stable firing platform. In the time it takes to reload, the gun and the vehicle have settled and are in exactly the same firing position they were in before, which is not always the case with a Lightning, where the recoil from the gun often moves the entire vehicle, forcing you to have to recenter your aim. Directly ahead of us is a freshly loaded Prowler. It's a full health vehicle, and we'll be attacking it from the front, which will give it the highest amount of survivability that it can get. Let's take a look at how many shots it takes to destroy this vehicle from the front. 1. And the reload. 2. 3 little cannon shots. 4. It is on fire now. And 5. Yes, it is gone. So a main battle tank of any kind can be killed by 5 shots to the front from this tank. Another great reason to remember to get the reload speed, because you will unload those 5 shots a lot faster with that than you will without it. It's also decent at killing maxes, which, as you can see, take quite a bit of damage from the first shot.
Enemy max spotted.
And will die in the second. Because this is an AP round, it doesn't have much in the way of splash damage, so it doesn't get that really nice explosive bonus against maxes that you might see from some other weapons, but otherwise it's just really good for shooting. The other thing it's important to know how to kill is a Sunderer, which of course is going to be one of your primary targets when you are driving one of these. So there's one in the distance.
Enemy Sunderer spotted.
One shot. Two shots. Three, it's down below half and smoking. Four. And the fifth one will usually finish it. And there it goes. So 5 shots to kill a Sunderer, and it does not take very long to accomplish. If you actually find a Sunderer that's deployed, oftentimes the driver is not there to undeploy it and run away. So if you find one that's deployed, any defense it has is going to come from something other than the Sunderer trying to beat a hasty retreat. Now looking at the halberd, we can switch seats with the F2 key. This is another excellent anti-tank weapon. It will kill a tank in about twice as many shots as the main gun, because it does about 1,000 alpha damage compared to the 2,000 from the main cannon, but it is still going to do significant damage, and what you can think of it as doing is essentially increasing your damage output by 50 to 60%. It does excellent damage to the front of a Prowler. As you can see, it is not really all that concerned with the frontal armor being all that tough. Its reload speed is similar to that of the main gun, so you'll be firing at about the same time each time you click the trigger, and it will definitely help you finish off heavy vehicles faster. And away goes the enemy heavy tank. It's also very good against maxes.
Enemy max
As you can
spotted.
see, it almost kills it in 2 shots, making it nearly as good as the main gun for taking out max units. Let's see what this tank looks like when we use it to do anti-personnel work. That'll involve me changing the guns. Firing on the move, 1 shot kill to infantry. How about a max?
We've got a hostile max in the area.
You can see it did an enormous amount of damage on the first shot and finished it off on the second. So it's also a 2-shot kill, just like the AP gun. Let's take a look at what it does to a main battle tank. You'll see that this is not as effective as the AP gun, which killed this in 5 shots. Here's our third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and on fire, and finally 8th shot for the kill at full health. One of the beautiful things about this when firing at infantry, however, is because of the large splash damage, you don't actually need to hit infantry directly to do substantial damage. Let's take a look. You can see that that shield on this infantryman lit up, and he's half dead from a near miss. And there he goes. A direct hit, of course, will kill anything that isn't wearing flak armor or running an overshield, but it's the ability to do the near misses that really makes it shine. Because in a lot of cases, you can actually intentionally target walls behind something in order to just make sure the splash damage captures as many people as possible within its radius as it can. That can be a very useful tactic when firing into windows and doorways. I also said earlier that the canister is very good at killing infantry and perhaps at longer ranges than you're used to. Let's take a look at that. The canister is essentially a giant shotgun, as you can see by the reticle. if you take a look at that infantryman over there,
We've got a hostile cloaker
that's a
nearby.
cloaker. He only has 900 health, so we'll switch to someone else to see what it does to a full health character. But
Spotted a
normally you would
hostile
not
thing.
want to try to engage somebody with a regular shotgun at this distance. However, 1, 2, and he's gone. 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 So for most cases, 2 shots will do the job. But let's take a look at this guy way off in the distance.
Eyes on a hostile light assault trooper.
Now, I don't know exactly how far away that guy is, but he is absolutely further away than you would normally use a shotgun to engage. Let's force the reload, and let's just unload on him and see what happens. And away he goes. So this weapon can actually be used against infantry very effectively at significant ranges, much longer than you would normally expect a shotgun to be used at. That was a 3-shot kill at that guy. And now we're rearming. Let's see exactly how many shots it takes to get rid of that guy in the distance. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's pretty amazing for a shotgun at that range. So if you're going to be using this weapon for anti-personnel work, I really recommend you use this, because not only will it do devastating damage to infantry at longer ranges, but you also get the opportunity to take out multiple infantry with a single volley if you aim well. So let's talk tactics. If you were using this in its heaviest hitting role, the armor-piercing cannon and a halberd or enforcer, you're generally going to be attacking hard targets all the time. You will not do the same thing if you're using it in the anti-personnel role, because the guns that are good for killing infantry simply won't hurt hard targets. You could fire this shotgun all day at the front of a prowler and it will do nothing. You could fire it at the back of a prowler and, unsurprisingly, it will still do absolutely nothing. So don't waste your time if you're set up for anti-personnel work engaging a lot of hard targets, because they will either be immune to your secondary weapon or they will take such little damage that it's a waste of your time. This tank is most effective in its hard target killing role with the AP cannon or the halberd, and if that's the case, what you want to do is prioritize certain enemy targets over all others. The first thing you should always attempt to erase from the world are other main battle tanks. That's because they have the firepower necessary to really hurt you in return. It's always wisest to take out the biggest threat to you as soon as you possibly can. The second target you should prioritize, if there are any in your range and view, would be enemy base turrets. They are a thorn not just in your side, but they are brutal to any enemy vehicle or any friendly vehicles, and they can also really do a lot of damage to infantry because of the tremendous total damage output and splash that they generate. When you're engaging certain types of enemies, however, there are a few things you can do that will absolutely drive them crazy and will tend to make your tank much more effective. And not surprisingly, one of the most vulnerable things to your vehicle is the Vanu Sovereignty's Heavy Tank. Let's take a look at what you can do with that. Now, somewhere around here, we should start seeing some mag riders appear, if I'm not in the way and blocking their spawn. We'll have to wait for one to show up in order for me to demonstrate this next tactic, but essentially what you can do is drive under the tank. Because it's floating off the ground and your tank front slopes down nicely, you can actually push it out of the way and get underneath it where its gun cannot reach you. When it comes to fighting against these monstrosities, what you really want is to discover them with the deployed mode engaged, which means they can't move. So your ideal tactic against them is to try to maneuver around behind them or to their side, putting your front armor towards the enemy tank. This will give you the highest possible damage output against them while minimizing the amount they can do in return. Now, we just saw that this cannon is not especially good at taking out this particular enemy, but let's see how much it does from the rear. If you remember, I believe it was 8 shots to kill this from the back,
On a TR prowler.
whereas that's 2, 3, and it's already smoking, and 4. So it cuts the number of shots you need in half. Now, unlike the Sunderer circumstance, the driver will pretty much always be in that tank or standing next to it repairing, so they will disengage that mode and try to maneuver. But if you can get even 1 shot into the rear of that tank, it will do devastating amounts of damage. I hope that you find this information useful and it allows you to spread freedom across the planet as a member of the NC. This is Chicken Beak signing off and wishing you happy tanking.